This is like news to us that Miles Morales and Gwen Stacy got married, and not only that, they had kids. Is that where the Spider-Verse series of movies is heading? We can't really say at this stage, otherwise it seems comics tend to have a life of their own. Anyway, in this video, we'll see how this story came to be, so stick around. The story begins with Miles' father going missing and his mother calling him on the phone. Miles is off somewhere in the city doing his Spidey thing. After consoling his mom and advising her to reach out to the police, he sets out on his own quest to find his dad. Okay, the story really started with Miles and Gwen kissing, but more on that later. So watch out, because it's about to get crazier from here on out. Miles would scout the city in search of his father, but would come out empty, and just when he is about to lose hope, a heliship appears. It's good timing because Miles was, in fact, thinking of approaching S.H.I.E.L.D. at that very moment. Maria Hill then aligns the ship, and to Miles' surprise, she knew about his real identity as Miles Morales. She also knows about his father's disappearance, but here's the thing, she was the one responsible for his disappearance in the first place. Maria had sent him on an off-the-books mission to retrieve a teleportation device she didn't want to fall into the wrong hands. But since he left on this mission, he has gone incommunicado. So Maria offers Miles the opportunity to work for S.H.I.E.L.D. by finding his father. She hands him a second prototype of the teleportation device. The device can be worn around the wrist, and with it, Miles opens up a wormhole and Maria bids him Godspeed. On the other side of the portal, Miles finds himself in New York, but it's different from the one he's used to, so he tries to find any landmarks he is familiar with. But it doesn't take long before trouble rears its head. He comes face to face with this dimension's version of the Ringer, and they engage in a fight. Miles is able to wrap things up with this classic villain of his quickly enough. Then Gwen would make an appearance, and there are already signs that she would be his future wife because he later refers to her as such. At that point, they were already friends, and upon meeting, they would hang out and drink some soda. The time spent together was a way for Miles to take his mind off the problem of finding his father. But Gwen would convince him to share his problem with her as a sort of therapy session. So he poured out his emotions, and this exercise with Gwen made him resolve to get to the bottom of things at any cost. So Miles gets up, pulls his mask over his face, and prepares to set out in search of his father. But Gwen sort of restrains him and throws in a hug for good measure. You can see the chemistry between them as she tries to be supportive of his mission. Then she goes on to talk about her own father and how he was murdered. She also let Miles know that they were both Spider-Folk, and she understood exactly what he was going through. It starts to seem like their eventual matrimony could work, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Just then, Miles' Spidey sense would spoil the mood. A group of ninjas were in the vicinity. While Gwen didn't think it was a problem, Miles wanted to get the hell out of there. Both Spideys were then met by Mike Murdock. You might know him as the Daredevil, and in this dimension, he is some kind of anti-hero. He gives Miles a clue and hands over a card that reads Club Scorpion. Miles and Gwen then head over to her house to wait until after dark, when the club's open. As they hang out, they talk about how Peter Parker in this dimension turned into Lizard Man and was subsequently killed by Spider-Woman. All in all, Miles and Gwen really endear themselves here. Eventually they head out, and what Matt Murdock wants from this is to neutralize a certain Jefferson, who is causing trouble for everyone, including himself. Miles can't get into the club because he's underage, so Gwen has to do most of the work. As Gwen explored the place, Dr. Ock would recognize her and try to incapacitate her, but Miles would show up in time to help out. There would be little time to gather their senses as Miles would come face to face with a man who looked just like his father. Mind you, this is a different dimension, so anything goes. This version of Jefferson punches Miles, then the armed goons start shooting as Gwen and Miles try to fight their way out of there. Eventually, Miles gets tossed out the window and comes face to face with the police. They tell him to stand down and unveil his mask, so Miles does the next best thing and skedaddles out of there with his webs as the police fire at him. On the roof, Miles gets overwhelmed with emotion because he just saw his dad, or at least a different version of his dad who didn't recognize him. Miles then tells Gwen that he wants to break Jefferson out of police custody. Miles still regards that man as his father, and not even a punch to the face has brought him to his senses. On her part, Gwen insists that he should stay with her so they can figure out things together. But Miles really wants to go, so Gwen shoots a few webs at him and wraps him up. Then she hugs him affectionately just so she can convince him to stay. But just then, a police officer interrupts their time. He would order them to take off their masks and surrender. But Gwen would find the teleportation device on Miles' wrist and press one or two buttons. A portal would be opened as the two disappear into it. At first, they would end up in a dimension where giant spiders had invaded the Earth. The duo would apply the device again and end up somewhere relatively safer. Just then, the device starts to beep, reminding Miles to get back to his original dimension. But Miles decides he'd rather see this through, and so they both teleport to the infamous Earth 616. They find more dead ends than actual clues there, but interestingly, they meet Miss Marvel, whom we know as Kamala. Sometime later, the trio are attacked by Silk agents. While Kamala and Gwen both escape to another dimension, Miles ends up in a different dimension of his own, which really is his original dimension. In fact, Gwen would get back to her dimension too, with both lovebirds realizing that they had been separated. At this point, Gwen has a teleportation device of her own, and a mysterious person constantly sends her pings on where she ought to go next. On Miles' part, he would try to chase down a lead across dimensions but end up coming face to face with the real version of his father. Gwen would follow close behind, not knowing she would be reuniting with Miles or his father for that matter. Just then, the Silk goons would start to shoot at them and end up ruining the portal. Gwen would be whisked away while Miles would follow soon after. They would end up in the dimension of Spider-Man Noir. While the portal is still unstable, the duo would get sucked into all sorts of strange dimensions. In one instance, it was a zombie-infested dimension. In another, Gwen is separated from Miles yet again and finds herself in front of a billboard which reveals that she and Miles are married with kids. The billboard was put up by well-wishers to celebrate their 20th anniversary. As for Miles, he'd end up back where the madness had all started. He meets his real father under better circumstances, but Gwen isn't by his side. In fact, she is in the Earth 8 dimension with Peter Porker. In that dimension, she and Miles have 2 kids whom she meets. They are a boy and a girl with spider powers of their own. And so Gwen starts to get the big picture. She has barely missed meeting the supposed parents who are on a second honeymoon, and you'd agree that would be awkward. And by the way, Peter Porker was only babysitting. Miles has finally reunited with his father and just wants to get home, but his father insists that he's not done with this dimension yet. S.H.I.E.L.D. would rather not have the teleportation device fall into the wrong hands, and that is exactly what the mission brief requires from Miles' father. So Miles offers to help, and they set off into the portal like Rick and Morty. Back on Earth 8, Gwen convinces Peter Porker to help her. They head for Earth 65 to intervene with Miles and his father, who have since taken the fight to Silk and his goons. Spider-Ham, or Pig in any case, would also call in some reinforcements, which were really spider folk from other dimensions. They would arrive and turn the tide in favor of Miles and Gwen, and of course his family. Ultimately, the bad guy would be thrown into a portal to live out the rest of his life trapped there. Afterwards, Miles is just as surprised as Gwen when she first met their future kids, but the difference is that they were made on the Earth 8. Apparently, in that dimension, Gwen and Miles went all the way and got married. And if you're conversant with how dimensions work, you'd know that dimensions can get wildly different from each other. Miles and Gwen might as well be sworn enemies in any random dimension, but seriously, the idea that they are both married somewhere out there gives both of them an idea of the possibility that lies before them. There's also a little pressure that comes from this realization, just as they are better off not rushing into things. They would kiss, but immediately back away so as to take things a little slower. At least the relationship worked in another dimension, and in truth, they could never tell how this specific one would turn out. But rest assured, they already had a precedent to follow.